The sound that woke me didn't belong in a quiet American neighborhood. It wasn't polite, not hesitant, not the kind of knock someone uses when they forget their keys. It was frantic, uneven, desperate. 3 sharp blows, a pause, then another harder, like whoever stood outside my door was afraid they might collapse before I reached it. I remember the way my pulse spiked before I even opened my eyes. Years in the Navy had trained my body to recognize urgency before my mind caught up. And when I swung my feet onto the cool hardwood floor and moved toward the door barefoot, half awake, I already knew something was wrong. But I wasn't prepared for what I saw when I opened it. My twin sister stood on my porch, her face swollen, her lips split, her eyes glassy with shock. She whispered my name once, and then her knees gave out. "My name is Emma Hale, and that was the night everything changed." I caught her just before she hit the wooden planks of my porch. She felt lighter than I remembered, fragile, in a way that made something tighten in my chest. Anna had always been softer than me, even as kids. We looked identical, same dark hair, same stubborn chin, but she carried warmth where I carried steel. As I lifted her into my arms, I felt her shaking. Not just trembling, full body shaking like her nerves had finally given up holding her together. "Anna," I said quietly, pushing the door shut behind us with my foot. Hey, you're okay. I've got you." She didn't answer. Her head rested against my shoulder, and I felt the damp warmth of tears soaking through my t-shirt. I laid her gently on the couch and flipped on the lamp. The soft yellow light made the bruises clearer. Too clear. A dark bloom spread across her cheekbone, fading into yellow along the edges. Her bottom lip was split. There were finger-shaped marks on her upper arm, deep enough to leave no doubt about how they'd gotten there. I moved automatically, muscle memory kicking in. First aid kit from the cabinet, clean cloth, ice pack wrapped in a towel. I'd treated injured teammates in helicopter bays, stabilized bleeding wounds during training accidents, even handled a broken collarbone mid-exercise. But my hands shook when I touched my sister's face. This wasn't a training injury. This wasn't an accident. This was violence that had happened in a living room in a marriage behind closed doors. She flinched when the cold cloth touched her lip. "Sorry," she whispered quickly. "I didn't mean to. I didn't want to wake you. You probably have training in the morning. I shouldn't be here." I froze for half a second. That sentence told me more than the bruises did. "Anna," I said, gently kneeling in front of her, "you can show up at my door at 3 in the morning for the rest of our lives. You never have to apologize for that." Her eyes filled again. She nodded, but I could see she didn't believe it yet. That was the thing about fear. It rewires you slowly, quietly, until you start thinking you're the inconvenience. I dabbed antiseptic on the cut at the corner of her mouth. She winced, and I noticed more bruises along her wrist. Older ones. Yellowing, half hidden. My stomach tightened. This hadn't happened once. "How long?" I asked softly. She looked away. It's nothing. We just argued." I didn't push immediately. Instead, I reached for the blanket draped over the back of the couch and wrapped it around her shoulders. Her hands clutched the fabric like a child holding onto something solid in a storm. Outside, the neighborhood was silent. Somewhere down the street, a porch light flicked on, probably one of the retirees who woke early. The normalcy of it all felt surreal. Just a few houses away, someone was probably pouring coffee, reading the paper, letting their dog out. And inside my living room, my sister looked like she'd walked through a battlefield. I took a slow breath. "Anna, who did this?" She didn't answer. Her eyes moved around the room, avoiding mine, lingering on the framed Navy plaque on the wall, then on the folded flag from my last deployment. She swallowed hard. "Anna," I repeated, quieter this time. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Mark." The name landed like a weight. I wasn't shocked. Not completely. Mark had always unsettled me. The first time we met, he shook my hand too hard, like he was testing me. He'd made a comment about how women in the military forget how to be feminine. Anna had laughed it off. I hadn't. I'd seen the way he watched her, the way he corrected small things, how she held her fork, how she told stories. Tiny adjustments, like he was shaping her. Still, I'd hoped I was wrong. "Did he?" I stopped myself. I didn't need to finish the sentence. She nodded once quickly, like she wanted to get it over with. "He didn't mean to," she added immediately. He was stressed. Dinner was late. I said something. No. My voice was calm but firm enough that she stopped. There's no version of that sentence that ends with you being responsible. Her eyes dropped to her hands. I shouldn't have talked back. That hurt more than anything else. Not the bruises, not the blood. That quiet acceptance. I reached out and gently lifted her chin so she had to look at me. Anna, you didn't cause this. She didn't argue, but she didn't agree either. The silence between us stretched heavy and complicated. I noticed her breathing short, uneven. She kept glancing toward the door like she expected it to open, like he might follow her here. Did he threaten you? I asked. She nodded again. He said, next time he wouldn't miss. Something inside me shifted. Not explosive anger, not rage, something colder, focused. The same calm clarity I'd felt before stepping into dangerous situations overseas. A line had been crossed and my mind started organizing itself around what came next. You're not going back tonight, I said quietly. She hesitated. He'll be angry. I don't care. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. He'll say I embarrassed him. I leaned back, slightly studying her face. Do you want to go back? She didn't answer, but the silence was enough. I stood and walked to the kitchen, poured her a glass of water and brought it back. She took it with trembling hands. I watched her for a moment, memorizing everything, the bruises, the fear, the way she tried to make herself smaller on my couch. I'd spent years protecting strangers in places far from home. That night, the mission came to me. My sister wasn't safe. And somewhere across town, a man believed he could hurt her and never face consequences. He didn't know yet that he had just made the worst mistake of his life. Anna fell asleep sometime after sunrise, exhaustion finally overtaking fear. She curled on her side, one hand tucked beneath her cheek, the blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. For a moment, she looked like she used to when we were kids after thunderstorms, when she'd climb into my bed and pretend she wasn't scared. But even in sleep, her breathing stayed uneven. Every few minutes, her brow tightened like her body hadn't gotten the message that she was safe. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee I kept reheating and never drinking. Outside, the neighborhood woke slowly. A truck started across the street. A dog barked once, then quieted. The ordinary rhythm of morning moved forward, indifferent to the shift that had taken place inside my house. I replayed everything she'd said. The hesitation, the apologies, the way she flinched at sudden movement. I'd seen those signs before, not in combat but in waiting rooms. Women who wore long sleeves in summer, voices that lowered automatically, eyes that scanned exits. When Anna stirred, I was already watching her. She blinked disoriented, then recognized the room. The realization seemed to hit all at once. She sat up slowly, wincing as her ribs pulled. Hey, I said gently, easy. She nodded and pushed her hair back. The bruise on her cheek looked darker in daylight, angrier. I didn't mean to fall asleep. You needed it. She glanced toward the front door again. That small unconscious motion told me everything. He doesn't know where you are, I said. She hesitated. He might guess. Let him guess. She took the mug I handed her, holding it close to her chest, letting the heat seep into her fingers. We sat in quiet for a moment. Then, without looking at me, she said, It wasn't always like this. I waited. At first, he just got frustrated. Work stress. Money stuff. He'd slam doors, throw things. Her voice stayed flat, almost rehearsed. Then one night he pushed me. He said I startled him. She paused, staring into her coffee. After that, it was always an accident, or I was dramatic, or I'd said something wrong. How often, I asked. She shrugged slightly. Not every day. That wasn't an answer. She kept going. He'd apologize, buy flowers, make dinner, tell me he was scared of losing me. Her fingers tightened around the mug. And I believed him. I leaned back, listening. The pattern was familiar. Tension, explosion, apology, calm, repeat. He hates when I talk to you, she added quietly. That caught my attention. Why? He says you make me question things. That you don't understand marriage. That you're too independent. She gave a small, humorless smile. He says women in the military forget how to be wives. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I remember that, I said. He doesn't like that we're twins either, she continued. He says it's like you're always watching him. I almost smiled at that. He wasn't entirely wrong. Has he ever hit you before, I asked? She didn't answer right away. Her gaze dropped to her wrist where a faint yellow bruise lingered. Yes, she whispered. The room felt smaller. He usually grabs my arms, she went on, or shoves me into something. He doesn't want marks where people can see. I clenched my jaw. That level of calculation told me this wasn't just anger. It was control. Does anyone else know, I asked? She shook her head quickly. No. He says if I tell anyone they'll think I'm exaggerating. He's good with people. Everyone likes him. That tracked, the worst ones usually were. And money, I asked. Her expression tightened. He handles it. My paycheck goes into our joint account. I don't have my own card anymore. He said it's simpler. Do you have cash? She shook her head again. That made the situation clearer. Isolation, financial control, emotional manipulation, physical violence, the full pattern. He drinks, I asked. Most nights, not always a lot, but when he's angry, more. Any weapons? She hesitated. A hunting rifle, in the bedroom closet. I filed that away automatically. And last night I asked quietly. She took a slow breath. Dinner was late. He'd been drinking. I said I'd had a long day. He said I was lazy. I told him that wasn't fair. Her voice cracked slightly. He grabbed the plate and threw it. It shattered. I told him to stop. He slapped me. I tried to walk away and he grabbed my arm. Then, she gestured weakly toward her face. I didn't interrupt. I left when he went to the bathroom, she finished. I just drove. Silence settled again. You did the right thing, I said. She shook her head. He'll be so angry. I leaned forward. Anna, listen to me. You leaving may have saved your life. Her eyes filled. I kept thinking he'd change. Every time. Hope could be a trap. I'd seen that too. You're here now, I said. That's what matters. She nodded slowly, though fear still lingered in her posture. Are you planning to go back, I asked. Her fingers twisted the edge of the blanket. I don't know. It's my house too. My things are there. My job. Everything. You're not going back today, I said gently. We'll figure out the rest. She looked at me, then really looked. You sound like you're planning something. I didn't answer right away, because I was. Instead, I said, right now we focus on keeping you safe. She exhaled slowly, like that alone felt impossible. Outside sunlight spilled across the living room floor. Dust motes drifted lazily in the air. It was peaceful, too peaceful considering the storm that had led her here. She reached out and took my hand. I'm sorry, she whispered again. I squeezed her fingers. You don't ever have to apologize for surviving. She nodded, and for the first time since she arrived, some of the tension left her shoulders. Not all of it, but enough to breathe. I watched her quietly, the bruises, the fear, the exhaustion, and underneath all of it, the sister I'd grown up with, the one who used to laugh too loud and cry at sad movies and believe people were basically good. Mark hadn't just hurt her body. He'd tried to shrink her. And that more than anything made my decision. He thought she was alone. He thought she would come back. He thought he still controlled the story. He was wrong. Because the moment she walked through my door, this stopped being his house, his marriage, his rules. Now it was my mission. And I intended to finish it. I requested emergency leave before Anna finished her second cup of coffee. The message to my commanding officer was brief, professional, and intentionally vague. Years in the Navy had taught me that sometimes you don't explain everything, you just say you need time and trust the system to hold. His reply came within minutes. Take care of what you need. We've got you covered. I stared at the screen for a moment longer than necessary. The military could be rigid in 100 ways, but when it mattered, it closed ranks like family. Anna watched me from across the table, still wrapped in the blanket, her hair pulled loosely over one shoulder. She looked smaller in my oversized sweatshirt, like she'd stepped into someone else's life and wasn't sure she belonged there. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. I did, I replied. You're not dealing with this alone. She lowered her gaze, absorbing the words. Outside, a lawnmower hummed somewhere down the block. The smell of cut grass drifted faintly through the open window. Everything felt painfully normal. That contrast, the quiet suburban morning, and the storm we were standing inside made me more determined. We spent the next hour making what I called a safety plan, though I didn't label it out loud. I pulled a yellow legal pad from the drawer and wrote in block letters. "Important documents," I said. "Do you have your ID, birth certificate, social security card?" She shook her head. "They're in the filing cabinet at home." "Okay, we'll need copies eventually." I wrote it down. "Clothes. Most of them are there." "That's fine, we'll get them later. What about a spare set of keys?" She hesitated. "He has both." I added another note. "People you trust nearby." She thought for a moment. "Mrs. Dalton next door. She's older. She hears everything." "That's good," I said. "Anyone else?" "Number." I nodded. It wasn't much, but it was something. We moved down the list: passwords, phone numbers, work schedule. The more we talked, the clearer the picture became. Mark had gradually taken control of every practical piece of her life: finances, transportation, communication. None of it happened all at once. It never did. It happened slowly, disguised as convenience. By late morning, the tension in the room had shifted. Not gone, but reshaped. Fear still lingered, but now it had structure, direction. "Let's get out for a bit," I said. "You need fresh air." We drove to a small diner just outside the base. The place looked exactly like every American roadside diner I'd ever seen: red vinyl booths, a bell that chimed when the door opened, the smell of bacon grease and coffee hanging in the air. A couple of retirees sat near the window reading newspapers. A trucker stirred sugar into a mug the size of a bowl. We slid into a booth. I took the seat facing the door out of habit. Anna wrapped her hands around her coffee again, letting the warmth steady her. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a bun, paused just long enough to take in Anna's face. Her expression softened, not with pity, but recognition. She'd seen bruises before. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "You two want pancakes," in a gentle voice. Anna nodded. While we waited, she stared out the window at a quiet row of houses across the street. "It's strange," she murmured. "Everything looks normal." "It always does," I said. She swallowed. "I kept thinking if I just tried harder, he'd calm down. I didn't want to be the person who ruins a marriage." I leaned forward. "You didn't ruin anything, he did." Her eyes glistened. "He says I push him, that I know how to set him off. That's not how accountability works." She nodded faintly, but doubt lingered. The waitress set down our plates. The smell of syrup filled the space between us. For a few minutes we ate in silence. The act of cutting pancakes felt almost absurdly ordinary, but that normalcy mattered. It grounded us. Halfway through, Anna spoke again. "I'll have to go back eventually. My job, my things." I watched her carefully. "Do you want to go back?" She didn't answer. Instead, she said, "He'll be expecting me." That was the moment the idea fully formed. Not as a flash of inspiration, but as something that had been assembling quietly in the background. I looked at her reflection in the diner window, our identical features side by side. Growing up, teachers used to mix us up constantly. Even now, people who didn't know us well sometimes hesitated. "You know," I said slowly, "you have something most people in your situation don't." She frowned. "What's that?" I met her eyes. "Me." She blinked. More specifically, I continued a twin. Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. "Emma." "I'm not saying anything yet," I said. "Just think about it." She shook her head immediately. "No, whatever you're thinking, no." I didn't say anything. "You don't have to. I know that look." I leaned back, letting the idea settle. "I'm not talking about revenge. I'm talking about control. He thinks he knows you. He thinks he understands how you'll react. What if that changes?" Her voice dropped. "That sounds dangerous." "It is," I admitted. "But so is sending you back alone." She looked down at her hands. Silence stretched. "You're stronger than me," she said finally. "That's not true." "You're not afraid of him." I considered that. I'm not afraid of what he thinks he is. She stared at me, and I could see the fear warring with hope. The idea shouldn't have made sense. It sounded like something from a movie, not real life. But the more I turned it over in my mind, the more it aligned with everything I'd been trained to do: observe, adapt, step into hostile environments with preparation. If I went there, I said quietly, I could control the situation. I could make sure he doesn't hurt you. I could get him to reveal himself. Her head snapped up. You mean, switch? I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. She shook her head, panic rising. Emma, no. He'll know. He'll see it in how you move. Then we practice. Her breathing quickened. What if he hurts you? I held her gaze. He won't get the chance. The diner hummed around us, clinking plates, low conversation, the hiss of the grill. Ordinary life moving forward. Inside our booth, the air felt charged. She whispered, this is crazy. Maybe, I said, but it might also be the safest way to end this. She stared at me for a long time. Fear lingered in her eyes, but beneath it something else flickered. A possibility. When we finally stood to leave, the plan wasn't fully formed yet, but it was alive. And as we stepped out into the warm Virginia afternoon, I knew one thing for certain. By nightfall, Mark wasn't going to meet the woman he thought he controlled. He was going to meet me. We closed the blinds when we got home, not because anyone was watching, but because it helped narrow the world to something manageable. The living room shifted into a quieter space. The afternoon sun filtered into muted gold across the carpet. Anna stood in the center of the room, arms folded tight across her chest, as if she could still talk herself out of everything. This is a bad idea, she murmured. Probably, I agreed calmly. She blinked. You're supposed to reassure me. I am. Bad ideas can still be necessary. That earned the faintest breath of a laugh, fragile but real. It faded quickly, though, replaced by tension. I moved a chair opposite her and sat down, elbows on my knees. If we're doing this, I said we do it carefully. No improvising, no heroics. Her eyes softened. That sounds like you. It's how I stay alive. She nodded. First, I said, standing, show me how you walk around him. Not how you walk here, how you move in that house. She hesitated, then slowly shifted her posture. Her shoulders curved inward, her chin lowered. She took a few small steps, cautious, like she was trying not to make noise. My stomach tightened watching it. She wasn't just acting, this was muscle memory built from months of shrinking herself. That's it, I asked gently. She nodded. I try not to draw attention. I mirrored her stance, rounding my shoulders, slightly softening my stride. It felt unnatural at first. My training pulled me upright automatically. She shook her head. Too confident, she said quietly. You don't look like someone who expects to be yelled at. I adjusted again, lowering my gaze. We repeated it, step by step. She corrected me every time I moved too sharply. No eye contact, she reminded. I usually look at the floor. Like this. She nodded. And your hands? I keep them close, not on my hips. That looks defiant. I tucked my hands together. She exhaled slowly. Better. We spent nearly an hour on movement alone. The process felt surreal, two identical women rehearsing fear. But the more we practiced, the more fluid it became. I softened my voice, shortened my steps, let hesitation creep into gestures. Then came speech. Say something he might hear, she suggested. I cleared my throat. I made dinner. She winced, too steady. I tried again, letting my voice thin slightly. I made dinner. I didn't know when you'd be home. She nodded slowly. That's closer. Each correction peeled away my natural posture, replacing it with hers. The transformation was unsettling. I could see how she'd adapted herself over time, molding her reactions to avoid triggering him. At one point, she sat down abruptly, covering her face. I didn't realize how much I changed. I crouched beside her. You did what you had to do to survive. She lowered her hands, eyes wet. It doesn't feel like survival. It feels like disappearing. I squeezed her shoulder gently. Not anymore. We moved to hair and makeup next. Our faces were nearly identical, but the details mattered. She parted her hair slightly off-center. I adjusted mine to match. She used lighter foundation. I copied her routine carefully. Small differences, barely noticeable, shifted my reflection. When she handed me her sweatshirt and I changed into it, the effect deepened. Standing in front of the mirror, I saw her. Not perfectly, my eyes held a different intensity, but close enough. Anna stepped back and gasped softly. Oh my God. I studied the reflection. The resemblance was uncanny. Without the military posture, without my usual clothes, I looked like a softer version of myself. someone easier to underestimate. "You really think this will work?" she whispered. "It doesn't have to be perfect," I said. "Just enough." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm scared." "I know." "What if he notices something?" "Then I leave, immediately, no confrontation." She nodded slowly, absorbing that. We moved on to logistics. She would stay in my guest room, doors locked. My neighbor's retired Navy would keep an eye out without asking questions. I'd take her car park where she always parked. Timing mattered. She told me he usually came home around 6 sometimes, already drinking. I checked my phone battery, set the recorder shortcut, and slipped it into my pocket. Every step felt deliberate, measured. Not revenge. Preparation. By late afternoon, the house felt heavy with anticipation. Anna sat on the couch, twisting her fingers together. "You don't have to do this," she said again. "Yes," I replied softly, "I do." She looked at me, searching. "Why?" I considered the answer. "Because he thinks he owns your fear. Tonight he learns he doesn't." Tears slid down her cheeks. She wiped them quickly, embarrassed. I pulled her into a brief hug. She held on longer than expected. "Come back safe," she whispered. "I will." When I finally stepped away, the room felt quieter. I grabbed her keys from the counter. The metal felt cool in my palm. At the door, I paused and glanced back. She stood in the lamplight, small but steady. For the first time since she arrived, her shoulders weren't hunched. I opened the door. Evening air drifted in, warm and still. The neighborhood looked exactly the same, kids' bikes on lawns, porch lights flickering on distant laughter from somewhere down the street. Normal. But nothing about the night ahead would be. As I walked toward her car, I adjusted my posture, letting my shoulders soften, my steps shorten. I wasn't Emma anymore, not on the surface. I slid into the driver's seat and gripped the wheel. The engine started quietly. And as I pulled away from the curb, one thought settled firmly in my mind. Tonight, Mark would think he was meeting his wife. Instead, he was about to meet the one person he'd never prepared for. The drive to Anna's house took less than 15 minutes, but it felt longer. Twilight settled over the neighborhood in soft layers of blue and gold. Porch lights flickered on one by one, casting warm pools of light across trimmed lawns and quiet sidewalks. It was the kind of street people described as safe. American flags hung from front porches. A basketball hoop leaned over one driveway. Somewhere, a sprinkler ticked rhythmically, watering a strip of grass that looked too perfect to belong to a place where violence lived. I parked where Anna always parked, left side of the driveway, angled slightly toward the curb. Her little blue sedan blended naturally into the scene. Mark's truck wasn't there yet. That gave me time. I sat in the car for a moment, breathing slowly. My hands rested loosely on the steering wheel, but my mind moved through checklists. Recorder ready, phone on silent, exit routes, windows, distance to the street. I wasn't here to fight. I was here to control. The front steps creaked faintly under my shoes as I approached. The porch swing swayed slightly in the warm air. I remembered sitting there years ago, both of us laughing about nothing while Anna talked about how excited she was to start her life here. The memory clashed sharply with the unease settling in my chest. I unlocked the door. The smell hit me first, stale beer, something sour, and the faint metallic tang of tension that seemed to cling to the walls. The living room was dim lit only by the fading light from the window. A lamp leaned crookedly in the corner. A picture frame lay face down on the coffee table, the glass cracked. I stepped inside quietly and closed the door behind me. The silence felt thick. I moved slowly, absorbing everything. A half-eaten plate sat on the dining table. 2 empty cans rolled near the couch. There was a small dent in the drywall knuckle height. My jaw tightened. None of these things screamed violence individually. Together they formed a pattern. Anna's presence lingered in the details. A folded blanket draped neatly over the armchair, a sewing kit on the side table, a book with a bent spine bookmarked halfway. Life interrupted. I walked down the hallway toward the bedroom. The door stood half open. Inside, the bedspread was wrinkled, one pillow on the floor. A necklace lay snapped in two near the nightstand. I recognized it, something I'd given her years ago. I picked it up briefly, then set it back down. Evidence of frustration, or anger, or both. I sat on the edge of the bed, adopting the posture we'd practiced. Shoulders curved inward, hands folded, head slightly bowed. My breathing slowed deliberately. The house creaked once settling. Then headlights flashed through the window. I didn't move. A car door slammed outside, heavy footsteps on gravel, the unmistakable thud of boots on wood as the front door opened. Anna Mark's voice carried down the hallway thick and irritated. "Anna, where the hell are you?" I kept my eyes lowered. He moved through the living room muttering under his breath. Complaints about dinner, about disappearing, about embarrassment. Each word sharpened the air. His footsteps approached the bedroom. He paused at the doorway. "Oh," he said, tone mocking, "so you're back." I kept my posture small. I came home. He stepped inside. The smell of alcohol followed him. He leaned against the dresser, studying me. "You think you can just walk out whenever you want?" I didn't answer. He laughed softly. "Unbelievable. You know how that made me look." Silence. He took a step closer. "Were you crying? That why you ran off because you can't handle a simple argument?" I let my hands tremble slightly. I didn't mean to. "Yeah," he cut in. "You never mean to. That's the problem." He moved closer, still looming. My heart rate stayed steady, but my muscles coiled ready. He reached out and grabbed my upper arm. The pressure was firm, possessive. "Next time you walk out," he said, voice low, "you won't like." He never finished. In one smooth motion, I shifted my weight, rotated his wrist, and guided his arm behind his back in a controlled hold. Not violent, not flashy, just enough leverage to stop him cold. He yelped in shock. "What the Anna? What are you?" I leaned slightly closer, my voice calm. "Try that again." He struggled instinctively, then froze when the pressure increased just enough. Confusion flickered across his face. His balance faltered. "Anna," he gasped, "what's gotten into you?" I released him slowly. He stumbled forward, rubbing his arm. The air changed instantly. The power he'd expected wasn't there anymore. I straightened slightly, letting the timid posture fade. He stared at me, eyes narrowing. "You're acting weird." I met his gaze for the first time. Something in my expression must have registered. He took half a step back almost unconsciously. "You're different," he muttered. I let the silence stretch. The house felt smaller, tighter. Outside, a car passed headlights, briefly illuminating the room. "Who are you?" he asked, voice quieter now. I stood slowly, shoulders back. "Someone you should have been kinder to." He blinked, confusion deepening. The shift unsettled him. He wasn't used to resistance, especially not from the woman he thought he'd conditioned. He tried to recover. "Don't start this again. You always twist things." I took one measured step toward him. "Do I?" He hesitated. For the first time since he walked in, the certainty in his posture cracked. He rubbed his arm again, glancing at the door, then back at me. His usual dominance had nowhere to land. And in that fragile silence, I knew the balance had already shifted. He didn't understand why. He didn't know who he was facing. But he could feel something had changed. And fear, once introduced, tends to grow. Mark stood there, rubbing his wrist, confusion slowly giving way to irritation. That shift was familiar the moment someone like him tries to reclaim ground they feel slipping away. His shoulders squared, chin lifting slightly, anger creeping back in to cover uncertainty. "What the hell was that?" he demanded. I didn't answer immediately. Silence unsettles people who rely on noise. Instead, I let him sit with the unfamiliar feeling of not being in control. The house hummed faintly around us, the refrigerator kicking on the faint tick of cooling pipes, the quiet suburban evening outside. Normal sounds, but inside the room tension tightened like a drawn wire. "You're acting crazy," he continued, trying to regain his footing. "You don't grab me like that, you don't—" "I don't?" I asked softly. He paused. Something in my tone made him hesitate. "You've had a long day," he said, switching tactics, voice lowering. "You're emotional, that's all this is." I took another slow step forward. "You hit her." His expression hardened instantly. "It was a slap. Don't exaggerate." "You grabbed her arms." "She pushed me." "You told her next time you wouldn't miss." His eyes flickered. "You're twisting things." I tilted my head slightly. "Am I?" He exhaled sharply, pacing once across the room. The movement felt restless, defensive. "Look, sometimes things get heated. Marriage isn't perfect. You know how you get." I stayed quiet. He kept going, filling the silence. You make me feel like the bad guy, like nothing I do is good enough. I'm under pressure. Work's been hell, money's tight, you nag, you push. Anyone would snap. There it was, the familiar script. Justifications layered over blame. I let him talk. You walked out, he continued, voice rising. You embarrassed me. What was I supposed to do? Pretend everything's fine. I reached into my pocket and tapped the screen of my phone. The recorder played softly, his voice echoing back through the room fragments of the last minute. You think you can just walk out. You make me look. Next time you won't like. He froze. What is that, he asked. Your voice, I said. His face paled. You recorded me. I didn't answer directly. I let the implication settle. You can't do that, he muttered. I already did. He sank onto the edge of the bed, running both hands through his hair. The shift was dramatic. Anger drained, replaced by something closer to realization. The power he relied on, privacy silence control, had cracked. You're trying to ruin me, he whispered. I'm trying to protect her. He looked up sharply. She exaggerates. She always has. You don't know what it's like living with her. I stepped closer, keeping my voice calm. I know what it's like seeing her show up at my door covered in bruises. He flinched. She provokes me, he insisted weakly. She knows how to push my buttons. That doesn't justify violence. He stared at the floor. The silence stretched again, heavier this time. Outside, a neighbor's porch light flicked on. Through the window, the world remained peaceful, indifferent. Finally, he spoke quieter. I didn't think she'd leave. You made her afraid to stay. He swallowed hard. His shoulders slumped slightly, as if the weight of the conversation finally pressed down. I never meant for it to get like this. That's how it always starts. He rubbed his face, breathing uneven. The bravado had vanished completely. In its place was something rawer, uncertainty, maybe even shame. What happens now, he asked. I considered him carefully. Now you stop. He blinked. Stop what? Everything. The drinking, the threats, the control. You give her space. You sign whatever she needs. And you never raise your hand again. He shook his head slowly. She's not leaving for good, is she? That's her decision. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. I can fix this. I can go to therapy, anger management. I'll quit drinking. I didn't realize. I watched him. The words sounded sincere, but sincerity wasn't enough. Not anymore. You don't fix this overnight, I said quietly. You don't erase fear with promises. He nodded weakly. I know. The room fell silent again. He looked smaller now, like someone who'd finally seen himself clearly and didn't like what he found. I'm sorry, he murmured. I didn't respond. Some apologies aren't mine to accept. He looked up. Will she come back? I shook my head. Not tonight. Maybe not for a long time. He exhaled shakily, nodding as if he expected that. I deserve that. Yes, I said simply. We stepped out onto the porch. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of cut grass. Across the street, an older man watered his plants. Life continued ordinary and quiet. Mark sat heavily on the steps, head in his hands. I didn't think she'd actually leave, he repeated. I stood beside the railing watching him. You don't realize what you have until fear stops working. He didn't argue. After a moment, he whispered, Tell her I'm sorry. I'll tell her you said it. He nodded. When I turned to leave, he didn't stop me. He didn't raise his voice. He just stayed there, shoulders hunched, staring at the ground. The man who had controlled that house now looked lost inside it. As I walked to the car, I felt something settle in my chest. Not triumph, not satisfaction, something quieter. The lesson wasn't the hold on his wrist. It wasn't the recording. It wasn't the fear in his eyes. The lesson was simpler. For the first time, he understood he no longer controlled the story. He no longer controlled her. And he never would again. I didn't start the car right away. I sat at the end of Anna's street, the engine off, hands resting loosely in my lap, watching the soft yellow glow of her porch light. Mark was still sitting on the steps, head bowed, shoulders hunched forward like something inside him had collapsed. The image stayed with me. Not because I felt sorry for him, but because I needed to let the adrenaline drain from my system before I went back to her. There's a strange quiet that comes after confrontation. It's not peace exactly. More like the air after a storm, still heavy waiting. My heartbeat slowed gradually. My breathing steadied. The plan had worked. But the mission wasn't finished. Real life doesn't end with a confrontation. It continues with paperwork, conversations, choices, and consequences. When I finally drove away, the neighborhood looked unchanged. Porch lights, parked cars, someone laughing faintly from a backyard. Ordinary life uninterrupted. But inside the car, everything felt different. The tension that had filled my chest earlier had shifted into something calmer, more deliberate. Anna opened my front door before I reached it. She must have been watching through the window. Her face was pale, eyes wide, scanning me for injuries. "You're back," she whispered. "I'm back." She grabbed my wrist, pulling me inside. "Did he hurt you?" "No," I shook my head, "not this time." Her shoulders sagged with relief. She guided me to the couch, sitting close, searching my face. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told her about the house, the broken frame, the smell of beer. I told her about his confusion, his anger the moment the balance shifted. I told her about the recording, the porch, the apology he barely managed. She listened silently, fingers twisting the hem of her sleeve. When I finished, she stared at the floor for a long time. "He cried?" she asked softly. "Yes." "That doesn't sound like him." "It's the first time he didn't have control." She nodded slowly. The emotions moving across her face were complicated: fear, guilt, relief, uncertainty. Healing rarely looks clean. It's tangled. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we make sure you're safe," I said. "Not just tonight, long term." The next morning we drove to a local advocacy center. The building was small with pastel walls and a quiet waiting room. A water cooler hummed softly in the corner. A few other women sat scattered across the chairs, each carrying the same mixture of exhaustion and fragile hope. Anna squeezed my hand tightly. A counselor named Deborah called us back. She was older, calm, the kind of person who made you feel understood before she spoke. Anna told her everything slowly at first, then more steadily. Deborah listened without interruption, occasionally passing a tissue, nodding gently. When Anna finished, Deborah explained options. Protective orders, separation paperwork, financial independence, counseling, every step practical, grounded. Nothing dramatic, just the steady process of reclaiming a life. We filled out forms, signed documents, took photographs of the bruises. Each action felt small, but together they built something solid. Over the next few weeks, Anna stayed with me. The rhythm of daily life returned gradually. Morning coffee, grocery runs, quiet dinners. She started sleeping through the night. The flinches faded. Her laugh came back in small bursts at first, then more naturally. She met with a counselor weekly. She opened a new bank account. She found part-time work at a local library. Simple things, but each one restored a piece of independence. Mark signed the separation papers without a fight. He entered a counseling program. Whether he changed or not wasn't my concern. What mattered was that he no longer had access to her fear. One evening we sat on my porch eating takeout. The sun dipped low, bathing the street in gold. Anna leaned back in her chair, watching kids ride bikes at the end of the block. "I don't feel scared anymore," she said quietly. I looked at her. The bruises had faded. Her posture was different, upright, relaxed, not the woman who had stood on my porch weeks earlier. "That's the goal," I said. She smiled faintly. "You saved me." I shook my head. "You walked out. I just stood beside you." She rested her head on my shoulder, comfortable, unafraid. For a moment we sat like that, the evening settling around us. That was when I understood something. My revenge wasn't the look on Mark's face. It wasn't the fear in his voice. It wasn't the control slipping from his hands. My revenge was this: her breathing steady, her shoulders relaxed, her life no longer shaped by someone else's anger. Freedom is quieter than revenge, but it lasts longer. Months later, she moved into a small apartment near the library. I helped her carry boxes up the stairs. She arranged her books carefully, humming under her breath. When we finished, she stood in the middle of the room, smiling. "It feels like mine," she said. "It is," I replied. As I left that evening, she hugged me tightly. "Thank you for not looking away." I drove home through the familiar neighborhood, the same streets, the same porch lights. But everything felt lighter. The storm had passed. Not because someone lost, but because someone finally walked free. If you've ever stood beside someone in their darkest moment, you know how powerful that is. And if you're listening to this, maybe you've been there yourself, either as the one needing help or the one offering it. Stories like this don't end with dramatic confrontations. They end with quiet victories, with doors closing gently, with fear replaced by peace. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever helped someone find their way out of a difficult situation, or wished someone had stood beside you? Leave a comment and share where you're listening from. And if you want more stories about courage, justice, and second chances, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Because sometimes the strongest revenge isn't hurting someone back. It's helping someone walk away.